que acende a sua vontade de começar algo? Tem uma faísca em você que te chama para empreender, investir, dar novos rumos para sua vida. E para todos os seus começos, você pode contar com Santander Select. Um banco mais pessoal, mais próximo, mais humano. Um time de especialistas com olhar atento para cada momento da sua vida. Porque você sabe, só quem já deu muitos passos está pronto para continuar começando. Santander Select. Começa em você, começa agora. Precisa aferir a pressão, medir a glicemia ou tomar uma vacina? Na Drogasil tem exames, testes e calendário vacinal completo. E o que é melhor, tem sempre uma Drogasil aí perto de você. É fácil, prático e rápido. Dá para ir entre uma música e outra. Procure nossos farmacêuticos. Quanto mais você conhece o que a gente faz na Drogasil, mais você se cuida.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and it's official. Adrian Newey will leave Red Bull in early 2025. But why is he walking away from F1's dominant force? And what is next for one of the most celebrated design geniuses in Grand Prix history? I'm Edd Straw, and join me to explain all are Glenn Freeman and Josh Suttill. Well, Glenn, we'll come to you first. We'll get straight into it, given this is very much a live news podcast. Obviously, we talked about Newey's departure on a podcast last week, but now it's been officially announced. Can you just give us the lowdown on what Red Bull has officially confirmed?
Yeah, I've got the press release to hand. I've even printed it off, old school. So, yeah, the announcement is Adrian is stepping back from design work at Red Bull Racing. They say he will continue to attend specific races to support the team trackside during 2024. I'll be fascinated to see how many races that is. Maybe it'll just be the countries Adrian likes going to. But his focus now for the remainder of his time at the Red Bull Group will be on finishing the development and just total completion of Red Bull's RB17 hypercar that's been going on for quite some time now. And then he leaves the Red Bull Technology Group in the first quarter of 2025, which I find quite interesting. Very, very well, specific and vague at the same time in a way, isn't it? There's obviously lots of quotes. Some of them are just press release fluff. Some of them are quite interesting. Newey says, I feel now is an opportune moment to hand the baton over to others and to seek new challenges. And then he says, I'm confident that the engineering team are well prepared for the work going into the final evolution of the car under the 4-year period of this regulation set. No mention of if he thinks they're well set for the rules that are following in 2026. And then one tiny little detail I think it's worth a mention. Right at the end of Adrian's official quote in the Red Bull press release, he thanks his close friend and manager, Eddie Jordan. So I assume that EJ has helped negotiate Adrian's release.
Well, surely who better than to find a loophole or any kind of end to a longer contract?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to have Adrian. I'd love to have Eddie Jordan fight in my corner on any contract talks.
Definitely. And that seems the crucial part, right? Because last week it seemed like it could be 2027 before Newey could be working for another team. Now this is a completely different prospect. We could be talking about within the next 12 months, Newey choosing to leave to join a different team and be working on their 26 car, their 27 car. It's a completely different prospect from what we were looking at last week. And it could be a really significant thing for the next era.
Yeah, I mentioned the kind of interest in that wording of he leaves the group in the first quarter of 2025. Obviously, they haven't been as specific to say, and there'll be there's no compete clause or no gardening leave or any of that stuff afterwards, because we know all of that was bundled in. We think all of that was bundled in to the original contract. But I was talking to regular on this show, Scott Mitchell-Malm, who's currently travelling to Miami, and we were trying to decipher some of this wording and get an understanding, and we kind of came to the same conclusion that reading between the lines, it does sound like the way they're doing this, and with this almost potentially a sort of year notice period, it might be that probably with the help of Eddie Jordan, perhaps Adrian has got a clean break from Red Bull when he finally leaves, and if so, that's huge, because that means if he chooses to stay in F1, and we'll talk about that later on, I know, Ed, he's going to be able to get in early enough to do some real work for somebody else on the new regulations that are coming.
And that's fantastic for F1, isn't it? That's the best possible outcome. The worst outcome would have been some horrible kind of gardening leave scenario where Newey's basically not involved in F1 for a couple of years, whereas this is potentially the dream scenario where we could have him in play at a rival team, like I say, within the next year.
Yeah, we're not quite sure what the dream scenario is for Adrian Newey as yet, but we'll talk a little bit about his future beyond Q1 of 2025 in a bit. But
if he makes it to Q2.
Well, exactly. Does he make it through? And has he used too many
Has
times?
he stayed out of the bottom 5?
Enough of that. But yeah, obviously it's very important that he's staying there to complete the RB17. That was probably quite a good bargaining chip because, as you referred to, that's a hypercar. It's not a WEC hypercar or anything. It's just a ludicrous road car. So it's a very limited run, super high performance. They said F1 level performance when they launched it, I think in 2022. I remember going to the launch at Milton Keynes for that. So it's really important he completed that because people will have signed up to buy that on the basis it's a Newey car, so he sees that through. That's probably quite an important thing. But the reasons...
That's being revealed at Goodwood in July, so I assume that's a Festival of Speed.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, I knew it was in the summer sometime. I didn't realise it was in July. So yeah, that really fits with the timeline. Now, the really interesting thing is the motivation behind Newey leaving, because this isn't a sudden thing. This has been brewing over the last year or more. He did a new contract last year, but he did have reservations, and those reservations still seem to be there. Obviously, he's not spoken publicly about that, but there's question marks about the direction of the team, question marks about the way the credit is divided, because Christian Horner's always at pains to give credit to everyone in the technical team and try and keep Newey a little bit in the background. So there's a little bit of that there. There's obviously some elements of the controversy that's embroiled Horner, which may not have entirely impressed Newey and may have given him some greater leverage in terms of getting out of the contract on the timescale he's going to. So this has been going on for a long time. And I guess, Glenn, that's the interesting thing. It's not one flashpoint, but this is about the wider direction of Red Bull and how Newey fits into it. He didn't feel that it was going the way he wanted it to for whatever reason.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because for so many years he's talked so glowingly about the fact that he loved the atmosphere at Red Bull. He loved the fact that he was there so early in the team's journey. You know, he joined for its second season as Red Bull Racing, and you know, he talked about he felt like he was sort of dealing with unfinished business that he had when he was at the little Leighton House March team, which he left to go to Williams. So this was his team. You know, he and Christian Horner in many ways built it up together, and Horner has said that in the announcement as well about, you know, how close they were. So I think for many years, even when in the past Newey's become disillusioned perhaps more with F1 than Red Bull itself, I was never surprised when Red Bull found a way to keep him. You know, whether it was letting him do other things, his time, the amount of effort and time he was spending on F1 has been quite flexible over the last 10 years in particular. But I just always felt that they would keep working it out because in many ways, this was his team almost as much as it was Horner's team. But as you say, this isn't a knee-jerk reaction to one serious issue behind the scenes or one controversy. There's been a few things all just adding up, and Newey's decided now's the time to go. And I think that's remarkable because I'd always felt until this story broke, around a week ago, that Red Bull was where he would see out his F1 career for however many more years that would be.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to consider how it all fits together on the timeline, because obviously Red Bull's changed a lot. Co-founder Dietrich Mateschitz, this was very much a passion project. All the motorsport programs for Red Bull were. He passed away in 2022. So I think that's changed things a bit. There's maybe even more of a marketing emphasis within Red Bull. Perhaps that's drifting it a little bit away from it being what was, to all intents and purposes, still very much a race team, by which I mean Formula One teams are very large now. They can almost become more their own little mini industrial businesses rather than racing teams. But Red Bull's tried to stay very, very race team focused. That's something Christian Horner always talks about as a virtue. And maybe it's drifting away a little bit from that. Newey's departure would suggest that, and the fact there's so much going on with Red Bull in general in the politics, etc. on top of that, perhaps supports that. But I think, Josh, the really important thing to underline here is everything we know says this is Adrian Newey leaving Red Bull because he wants to leave Red Bull. It's not primarily about what happens next. It's not that, I'd rather be here than there. It's actually, I just don't want to be part of Red Bull anymore.
Yeah, it seems like whatever decision he takes next could be one for him to, mull over in quite some time. It's hard to say, but my impression is that he's not quite sure what he's going to do yet. I'm sure every team boss has already been ringing him up for the last few months anyway, but obviously that's only going to increase now. So I'm sure he'll take a bit of time to work out what he's going to do next. But yeah, very much it's a case of Red Bull has lost Newey rather than any other team has sort of won over Newey.
Yeah, and I think no matter what spin is put on it, because there will be talk about what he was or wasn't doing, and actually will carry on as usual. It is a big loss because, as we talked about before, Newey is a very, very unique individual in the way he operates. We talked at length about what he brings to a team.
Well, we've already seen that kind of narrative that, this Red Bull isn't all about Newey kind of being built up over the last couple of years. I guess perhaps Red Bull had that in mind. Obviously, they knew at some point Newey would leave, and they were always keen to stress that it wasn't all because of Newey. But that's exactly the kind of thing you say when, someone like Newey's leaving. You're not going to say, oh, yeah, it was all Newey, and actually now we're a little bit screwed. Of course, what you have to kind of say is, well, there's a lot of other people there who can take over, and obviously that's the test that's going to be played out over the next couple of years.
And the interesting thing is, when Red Bull have lost people before, which they have, people like Dan Fallows, Peter Pedromu, going a little bit further back, they always talked about the fact that, well, they're really, really accomplished technical people, but they're not really the creative spark. That's Adrian Newey. So you can't have it both ways. But any team in any sporting arena will downplay the influence of the person who's leaving. But I don't think we can have any doubt of how influential and important Newey was. Well, Josh, let's look a little bit more at Red Bull's future post-Newey. How big a blow is it to lose him? And how do you see the next few years playing out in the post-Newey world?
Whatever spin is put on it, this is a huge blow for the team. You'd probably put it on par with Verstappen leaving, because Newey's had such an impact. You could make an argument it's even more impactful than that. Whatever they say, I think it's quite seismic. Half of those 25 drivers and constructors titles he's won has been with Red Bull. So he's had a huge impact, and it's a big question mark for them. There's already a huge question mark over the engine project for 26, and now they've got to design the car without Newey. So it creates a bit of a horror show of unknowns really for 26. I'm sure that you could say that's a great window of opportunity for both sides, but you can also look at it as a very, very perilous thing. I'd recommend reading Mark Hughes' article about it on The Race. He did a really good piece looking at just how impactful Newey's been. And I think what Red Bull will be losing is that gold dust that Newey can bring to the team. He's not leading the technical team. I think that can be a bit of a misunderstanding sometimes. He's not really been the kind of technical director or kind of leading role for over a decade. But what he's brought has been very significant in terms of those little pieces of gold dust, specifically around this era of ground effect. Newey said, he's done a bit of the suspension and a few other pieces, sort of almost like a throwaway remark. But obviously, in this era, that is absolutely crucial. And that has been arguably the bedrock of not only Red Bull's success at the start of this era, but every year since, because you get that right and it's just a great platform to build on. You get it wrong or get confused, like we've seen with Mercedes in particular, and you're nowhere. So what Newey gave Red Bull in 22 in particular has been the absolute bedrock. And going forward, obviously, they're not going to have those little bits of magic dust, and we're going to find out just how important those were, I think, going forward.
It's one thing to discuss how big a blow we think it is, or how important we think he is to Red Bull's success, but shall we dig into what nearly 250,000 F1 fans think? Last year on the Race's YouTube channel, we ran a poll where we said, if you were setting up your own F1 team and you could take one element from Red Bull, what would it be? The options were Max Verstappen, Christian Horner, Adrian Newey, or the Honda engine. Newey got 72% of the vote. So in terms of what the fan base thinks, is pretty clear. I'll give you the others. Verstappen was 18%, the Honda engine was 6%, and Christian Horner was only 4%. We won't dwell on that. But maybe this is just perception, though. Everybody thinks... We all buy into that thing of, Adrian Newey's this great designer. He designs all these championship-winning cars. No race car in the 2020s is designed as much by one person as cars were, say, in the 1990s when he was leading Williams and then McLaren to success. It doesn't work like that anymore. But Josh mentioned the 2022 car and kind of the platform that Newey gave. I know that when we hear all these things about, he's not as hands-on with other parts of the car as other people, all these other people are really important to the task as well. Do all those other great bits that those people have done, and I'm sure they do deserve credit, and it's right that a team like Red Bull doesn't try and pin it all on one individual. You've got lots of people there, they deserve credit too. Do the things they are doing work as well without Newey kind of setting the parameters for you? Of going, right, here's the ride control through the suspension. Here's what I know about ground effect from my previous experience of it. Last time it was in F1. Let's make sure we don't make these mistakes. And then all the bits you build on top of that. That's when it all comes together, providing you've got that platform. So I'm sure he's been massively influential. But at the same time, Red Bull has a lot of clever people doing the other parts of the car that he had no involvement in.
Yeah, that direction setting seems really important because, again, to go back to Mercedes, they've got incredibly talented technical people. And I bet a lot of people within that team have been doing some really good work over the past couple of years. But without the proper direction and the proper way of going, all of that means nothing. And that's not to say that will happen to Red Bull, but it means that, they need to make sure that they can still go in the right direction. Otherwise, all that good work won't come to fruition.
There's a couple of other things I'd pick up on as well. One is actually from Christian Horner's quote in the press release announcing the news today, where he cites Adrian's remarkable talent for embracing change and finding the most rewarding areas of the rules to focus on. I think that's for a press release quote, that's a really good specific piece of credit that I think actually tells you something. But there was one other thing I wanted to pick up on about, it's slightly the intangibles. It's not purely, he didn't design the rear wing or he didn't design the side pods. He wasn't in charge of this, that and the other on the car. But a great example of the sort of thing he can bring to a team and something that Red Bull are going to be losing was something he gave away in an interview. He's done a couple of great interviews while we've been here at the race with Mark Hughes. And there was one it was last year. So in 2023, he did an interview where he explained that when Red Bull found out about the rule change that was coming in for 2023, where the floor edges were being raised to tackle the problems of bouncing, other people within the Red Bull technical group wanted to fight that regulation change really hard because they're going, we've got a great car at the end of 2022. We don't want it, even a subtle change that might take away some of our advantage. It was Newey who said, hang on a minute, the change in car characteristics that this tweak is going to give us might actually fix a slight weakness we have. He said they had a weakness in high speed corners relative to Ferrari in 2022, and actually the floor edge change helped them. Imagine if he hadn't been there and nobody else had worked it out, and Red Bull had been fighting this, if they'd been pushing to get maybe that change reduced or to get it delayed in some way, what turned out to actually be a help to them, a fix for a slight problem they had, wouldn't have come in. So it's those sort of things. It's not so much his hands-on work, it's his brain and the way he thinks. And whatever they say and however talented the rest of the people in that team are, that is a huge loss.
Yeah, and it's why the argument about how much he's doing is redundant in this. Because if he does, let's just take a number. Let's say he does 1,000 hours of work for Red Bull a year, but those hours produce some of the key parameters, some of the key work and the key ideas, the creativity. That's absolutely vital. And it's a big challenge for Formula One teams. They're such big design organisations now. having somebody who can inject those conceptual ideas, who can see the big picture, and also who's allowed the room and the breathing space to do that. Because if you're there fully on the coalface, you're absolutely working yourself basically to death to grind through everything. You don't have time to step back, wander around a bit, wait for the Isaac Newton apple falling on the head apocryphal tale moment to happen. And that is the fantastic thing that Newey offers. Red Bull can do everything they need to do to design and build a Formula One car without Newey. You take him out, you're not losing any of your nuts and bolts, but you are losing those ideas. And yeah, as was alluded to, the fact that he did the suspension on the 2022 car and understood the interaction of the mechanical platform and the aero. Don't absolutely drive the floor to the maximum possible downforce figures, because then you're going to have bouncing and porpoising. It's that clarity and understanding. Here's a set of rules. Here is the best bias of ideas to do it. And remember when the blown diffuser came in? Now, the exhaust blown diffuser was not a new idea. There was one on a Williams FW14B back in the day, for example. But the way the rules were, the way everything happened, it became a worthwhile thing to do. And he's just very good at thinking of all these ideas. Some of it's new ideas, some of it's just retasking old ideas. He's an encyclopedia of how race cars work. And it's like you give him a rule book and he'll go over to the shelf and he'll take, a bit of that, a bit of that, a bit of that, chuck it all together as a concept and idea and feed that into the design process. That's really, really valuable.
And he seems to have quite a good ability to troubleshoot as well. And if there are problems in 26, you can bet part of Red Bull will be thinking, I wish we had Adrian here to give his take on. Again, even if he wasn't the one spending 1,000 hours to fix the problem, but even just a bit of his insight over 100 hours would be useful. If we're talking about...
They've done that before. There's other years where he hasn't really been involved in the car. Something's gone wrong, and then he has to come in to fix it.
Exactly, and so something they're not going to have if that happens in 26. And talking of a blow for Red Bull, if he joins another team, that's obviously going to be a blow for Red Bull, because everything we've talked about in this section is then going to belong to a rival team that's threatening Red Bull.
I think the other thing that's worth stressing about Newey, we mentioned the fact that the way credit is given out may play a part in this, which might portray him as an egomaniac. Now, everyone's got an ego, but he's also lacking in the technical arrogance that is easy to fall into. To be honest with Adrian Newey, if I went up to him with some technical observation about the car that was valid and threw some fresh thinking on it, which of course I couldn't do, but he would take an idea from anywhere and appraise it. And he avoids the sort of sacred cows in his own ideas. That's from what we've heard. Maybe earlier in his career there was a tendency to go a little bit too far, but like everyone, he's learned over the years. So this is a real test of Red Bull's robustness, and they've got great people there. Pierre Vacher, the technical director, Enrico Balbo, the head of Aero. They are really, really accomplished. They are not idiots. They're not mere functionaries. So they and all the people working for them can generate good ideas. Whether they can have that step back creativity to get the concept right and just those little ideas and course corrections and that kind of thing that Newey can throw in, we don't know. But it's going to be a great test of that in 2026.
Some of those people will see it as an opportunity as well to step out of his shadow.
Absolutely, and that's the reason why the credit thing's been so political, because you can understand it if you're Pierre Vacher or any of the people working there. If everyone's saying, well, this is just all Newey, you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've done all the real work, that kind of thing. But it's like everything, it's collaborative, and they have different things. And I think there's huge value in having the sort of the floating free roll, to use a footballing term, of creativity that Newey does. Who cares if he doesn't do anything on the F1 car for 2 months? If he injects those ideas, that's what he uniquely brings with his understanding and experience and vision.
And will everyone else stick around? We've heard Vacher obviously is a key target of elsewhere. Will Red Bull, lose anyone else over this? You can see it both ways. Like I say, it's a chance for them to step out the shadow, but also is it, a couple of cracks in the team? From everything we understand, it seems like Verstappen wouldn't be completely, this wouldn't be a huge reason for him to depart. But I wonder if there's a couple of other people there who are thinking, oh, this is not quite the super team it was a couple of years ago.
It's possible. From my knowledge of Vacher, I think he'll see this as a great opportunity to really stamp his authority. He's hugely accomplished, hugely capable. So, of course, he should relish being able to do that. Why wouldn't you? I think anyone in that situation would. But they need to think about how they create things. We've never seen a Red Bull Racing, at least not after the first 18 months or whatever, that's not an Adrian Newey team. So this is something different, something new for them. They've been created, they've grown up to harness Newey in whatever way they can. And so you remove that will change things. That's just how things work.
Yeah, Josh briefly mentioned Verstappen there. Our understanding is that Verstappen is a big believer in Vache. So, I don't think he'll be particularly concerned by this announcement.
Yeah, and I think there's every reason to be very confident in Vache, but there's even more reason to be confident in Vache and Newey together. That's the thing. Newey is the garnish, if you like, if you want to think of it that way.
And obviously Red Bull will know that this will create, inevitably, if they hadn't had enough of these questions already, sort of questions over Verstappen's future, questions over the team, and it's just going to, I guess, continue that cycle of kind of controversy and speculation over the team is only going to continue, especially now we've got something that's completely tangible, a tangible exit. It's only going to spark more conversations about other theoretical exits.
They don't get many quiet weekends, do they, at the moment?
Well, the thing is, Glenn, as you'll have seen, a few people on social media, some of the listeners to the Bring Back V10s podcast that you host, which tells classic F1 stories. Newey's obviously a big feature in that. But people say, it's like we're living through a Bring Back V10s episode as it's happening. And in 20 years' time, there could be this Red Bull, the fall of Red Bull story that tracks through this period, probably going back to 2022 and the loss of Mateschitz through over what happens in the coming years. It could be. We don't know. We're going to yet to see how it plays out. I would say, though, this is still a robust team. There's still a lot of great facilities, great people in that team. So what a fantastic opportunity for everyone and for Red Bull to show that how well they can do. And I think there's always been a lot of desire there that whenever Newey does go, they're able to do what they need to do. So this is the test of that.
What will be interesting for me, though, is obviously in 26, they're building their own engine. So I wonder, how much of the assessment of how good that car is going to come out, because you've either, if the team doesn't perform well, you're either blaming the fresh engine that you've started building, or you're blaming the fresh car that you've started building without Newey. Obviously, previously you could pin it on Renault, and rightly so. It was a slow and unreliable engine. But now they've kind of got no external excuse. It's either the car or the engine. Likewise, obviously, if it's a success, that's a great story. They've done it with their own engine. But if not, there might be a bit of an uncomfortable question there, and it might actually take a while for us to even know whether or not they are producing a good car, or whether it's the engine letting them down.
Well, and what's absolutely clear is I think Red Bull will continue serenely to the end of 25. I don't think there'll be a big impact. Newey's done all the groundwork on these cars.
Oh, yeah, they're winning next year's championship regardless.
Exactly. And when we see new things on the car, he's not responsible for all of them during this process, but the architecture, the framework, the ideas are all still there. So 2026 is the acid test. And yeah, you're right. Disentangling the engine input, the chassis input, and that kind of thing is going to be a big challenge that we will take on in future podcasts in a couple of years' time. Right, Glenn, let's ask the question everyone in F1 is throwing around, including the team bosses who will want to recruit him and doubtless have been lighting up his phone in recent days. What is next for Newey? What indications do we have on what his thinking might be about the future?
Not massive indications yet, obviously, but there is one thing I thought I'd bring up. I don't know if this has happened yet, but I do know he's due at some point in 2024 to take delivery of a mega sailing boat that he's had a big hand in designing, and there was some material, there's nothing to do with Red Bull, there was some material released late last year around that project, and in that he said he wants to spend more time sailing. He said he's possibly even interested in sailing around the world. There was a particular quote where he said that he sees himself taking this forward as a hobby and a passion as I start to have a little bit more time available. So that says to me that even if he wants to stay involved in F1, he's not about to accept an offer that someone might make him to say, come and be our full-time designer or technical director or chief technical officer, whatever you want to call it. That's not going to happen. So if he wants to continue, any sort of role he accepts, I think will be similar to what he has now in terms of that flexible involvement. There's a couple of other interesting things he said in the recent past, though, that I think we can read into a bit now. There was a brilliant interview last year with BBC's Andrew Benson where Newey made clear that he doesn't see the appeal of retirement. He said that he's often thought to himself, well, I'm quite enjoying this, and what else would I do? I'd get bored lying on a beach. And in that same interview, he said that he took advice from Bernie Ecclestone and Roger Penske, two titans of our sport, who have have stayed very active and have stayed very mentally sharp well into what I think is fair to call old age. Bernie's 93 now, Roger Penske's 87. They both told him, don't stop working, because they said, think of the brain as a muscle that continuously needs exercise to stay fresh. So obviously Adrian could get that exercise outside of F1. I imagine it would keep you pretty mentally busy trying to sail around the world in your own boat. I hope and suspect that because of the way he's decided to leave here, as we've said, he's leaving because he wants out of Red Bull. I don't think he's leaving because he's done with F1. So that, coupled with the fact that we have new regulations right on the horizon, I think that means that, providing his departure allows him to crack into those regs at some point next year when he's clear of Red Bull, I think the stars align for him to go, great, there's another new thing I can get stuck into and I can go and make a difference somewhere very quickly. And I think that will appeal massively. So I do expect that we'll see him continue in F1. What we don't really have any indication of, other than his occasional sort of list of regrets that he gives in some of these interviews about drivers and teams he'd like to work with, we don't have any specifics on what he might be interested in doing, do we?
No, I'm no sailing aficionado, but I have looked up and it does say it would be a few years it would take to sail around the world. So I'm hoping that's not the option he goes for. Otherwise, like you say, he's ruling himself out for quite a few years. Ed, most of the talk seems to be around Ferrari. Could you see that happening? It's been talked about so many times. Newey's rejected them a few times. Could this finally be the time where he accepts it?
I can see the arguments for Ferrari. In particular, Gary Anderson wrote a piece for our website where he talked about the fact that he could also do a Ferrari supercar with all of Ferrari's resources and prestige and that kind of thing. So that could be a big part of the project. And then he could have a similar effect on the F1 program as sort of breathing in some creativity and ideas. So I can see the argument for that. I've always been sceptical about Newey going to Ferrari, to be quite honest.
Same.
He's turned it down numerous times. He hasn't had the best experience of dealing with Italy in his life with the whole Senna trial thing. That made a big mark on him. Doesn't necessarily mean he wouldn't do it, but I don't know. And I also know that he's not going to do it John Barnard style. Obviously, when John Barnard was at Ferrari twice, in fact, this happened, he said, I'm not going to go in and do it in Italy. So they let him build up a technical facility in Guildford to do it. And in fact, he built up two technical facilities quite close to each other in Guildford because he had two stints at Ferrari.
Well, and they sold the first one just before he came back.
Exactly, yeah. There was a Benetton stint in between. So if Newey does Ferrari, he would be all in on Ferrari. Not Ferrari F1 purely, but I think on the wider thing. But I just don't think it's going to be... I don't think it's going to be Ferrari. It could be. Newey's the only one who really knows what he's thinking, but I'm just not convinced.
I'm not sure he wants to relocate. Obviously, in the past, that would have been because of a young family and that sort of thing. So some of those potential obstacles have probably changed now. But yeah, I feel like Ferrari would maybe want a bit more of him than some other teams. And yeah, I think he's more likely to accept a job with a team that's UK based. It's just less disruption to him and his personal life. He's been offered the keys to the Ferrari road car kingdom before. When they went for him in 2014, they said you can have complete control of basically everything we do with our road cars. And while he was tempted by it, again, didn't want to relocate to Italy. So maybe Fred Vasseur will do an incredible job, like he did on Lewis Hamilton, in convincing Newey that now's the time to go there. And I'd love to see Charles Leclerc and Lewis drive some Adrian Newey cars, particularly ones painted in red. It's a great romantic story. I'm not... There's just been too many indications up to now. So unless his mindset has completely changed and all the reasons he's turned down Ferrari in the past have completely changed now, I don't think that one quite adds up.
Yeah, exactly. And there will be plenty of... all teams will be trying their luck with him. I expect perhaps the likes of Haas might think it would seem a bit sarcastic to try, but everyone
don't buy a ticket, you don't win the raffle.
Well, that's exactly it. Obviously, there's been talk about Aston Martin. I'm not sure how sold he is on Aston Martin. I don't see Lawrence Stroll and Adrian Newey as a great combination, to be honest. I see a little bit of a misalignment there. I love the idea of Williams.
What about Dan Fallows as well? Is he going to want Newey? You know, he was one of the people who did break out of the Newey shadow by leaving Red Bull.
Well, yeah, he moved to go and be the technical boss.
The chief.
So yeah, that would slightly change things for him.
I think we can rule out McLaren as well, can't we, if there wasn't space for Sanchez.
I think they need an
space
extra
for
complication in that technical structure.
The only thing I would say about McLaren is the way Andrea Stella does things, he could probably make a pretty good case to Newey. I can't really see him going back to McLaren, though. I'm not sure that's quite the thing he'd want to do, but who knows?
I'll throw in a Mercedes if we want a proper good, last challenge for Newey, or who's to say this even is his last challenge? But if we want a good end of career challenge, why not Mercedes? The team arguably lacking the most direction of any of the front runners. Newey, the guy who's set the direction for the dominant team. I could potentially see that, but it's more of an exciting argument, I think, from a neutral standpoint than a one that makes a ton of sense.
I love the idea of Williams to kind of complete the circle in F1. Obviously, although he didn't start at Williams in F1, he was at Fittipaldi initially and was at Force Haas for a bit, and then Leighton March. But that could be an interesting one. If I was Doralton Capital who owned them, I'd think, right, do you know what? We're going to sit down with him. We're going to offer him a stake in the team. It'd have to be a symbolic thing, because I think that was one of the key reasons why Newey left before. He didn't feel like it was his team. He didn't want it really for financial reasons, but he wanted that stake to be given to say, right, do you know what? This is not just Frank Williams and Patrick Head. This now is Frank Williams, Patrick Head and Adrian Newey. Big regret they didn't do that. What a thing it would be to go back and just breathe some of that magic into Williams's recovery. Again, he could sit above Pat Fry in that technical structure. He could probably act in a very similar way to the way he has at Red Bull. No evidence that that's something that is going to happen, but it's the kind of thing that, knowing Newey's mentality, could appeal, even though it couldn't offer him all these supplementary things.
We said that Ferrari's the romantic option. Williams is the true romantic option. Going back, doing well. We can all, or we do all, trace the beginnings of the decline of Williams to when Newey left. It's such a long road to recovery that I don't know if he'd be there for long enough to help them all the way to the front. But maybe he could do a stint that puts them back properly in the right direction and moves them up the order. And it would just be, it would be an incredible throwback to earlier in his career. You mentioned the thing about having a stake in the team in the past, or that's what he wanted. It was also, in his own words, he there wasn't room for a third person at the table alongside Patrick Head and Frank Williams in terms of decision making. So that was what made him leave for McLaren before. So that would be incredible. Particularly you mentioned bring back V10s earlier. With my bring back V10s hat on, Adrian Newey back at Williams would be superb. Who haven't we mentioned? We've mentioned almost all of them. But we obviously haven't mentioned Audi. Might they be interested in his input?
They'd have the finances, wouldn't they? They'd have the lucrative offer.
They might have a go.
I guess we can rule out RB, whatever they're called at the moment.
Yeah.
It'd be enough to let Andretti in, wouldn't it? With a Newey designed car, they'd have to let Andretti in then, surely.
That'd be I tell you what, Adrian Newey, race engineer of Mario Andretti in IndyCar, I think in 1987, wasn't he? So he knows Mario. That would be a hell of a gambit to get him in. I'm sure.
Yeah, say no to that, F1.
I'm sure you try. I mean, the Andretti thing seems fairly a flight of fancy, but the thing is with Newey, he's quite creative. He's not just going to want to go somewhere that pays him lots that will guarantee him race wins. He'll want some kind of project. But for that same reason, he might not want to go anywhere in F1. We know he's lost a little bit of the enchantment with F1 with the tightening rules, etc., the 2026 car regulations, which are being finalised as we speak. Don't know whether he's especially keen on elements of those. So he might just want to go and do something else. That's not just doing the sailing projects for his own amusement. He's a rounded intelligent design engineer. He could get involved in anything. And we see people like this. Gordon Murray has done all sorts of projects since leaving F1. John Barnard makes carbon fibre furniture with his company, doesn't he? So
amazing.
So Newey, the world is his oyster in that regard, and there could be something else that's not F1 that he wants to do. He's completed F1 10 times over, after all. That I wouldn't necessarily rule that out.
He has mentioned road cars, not in the supercar kind of way, but just normal road cars. He's incredibly frustrated that kind of with the electric vehicle revolution that may or may not be going on at the moment, he's infuriated by how sort of inefficient those vehicles are in many ways. He doesn't understand why they're so big and so heavy. If there's something else that was going to pique his interest, it could be something like that, where he'll just go, why on earth do we make these cars so cumbersome, which makes them inefficient? So a completely different challenge, but maybe something that he would be interested in as the road car industry goes through a period of real change and uncertainty.
And he is 65, so if he doesn't join another team, we can't rule out that he could do so in the future. His value is so high that in 5, 6, 7, 8 years even, if he was willing to, I'm sure he could come back. He's not going to stop being an attractive prospect just because he takes a couple of years out to do electric vehicles or sailing or gardening or anything.
Did we mention every team except Alpine? Is that telling?
I think that less likely than Andretti, I'd say.
Exactly.
The only picture Alpine is like, we're rubbish. It'd be hilarious if you came here and made it good. But yeah, I'd find that one quite hard to see happening, which says a lot about Alpine because it is a works team. So really, they should be a contender. But yeah, I think that's a pretty ridiculous proposition. The one thing that is significant on this is the timeline, because although from what we understand and reading between the lines of the announcement, he would be available to work for a team earlier than perhaps we initially expected. Still a bit late for 26 because there'll be conceptual work going on now for 26. You can't do aero development until January, but you can still throw around ideas and that kind of thing. So any team that, let's just say for the sake of argument, a team signs him and he can start work on April the 1st or May the 1st, something like that, so a year from now. Is that quite early enough? Obviously, it'd be hugely beneficial, but it's actually a little bit later than ideal because you may have to make some adjustments. But then again, he started work on the 98 McLaren after work had begun, and he made some very key decisions there about the kind of the concept of the car that played a big part in the relevance of that. But what we do know is every team's going to be bending over backwards to try and tempt him.
Yeah, it's Adrian Newey, right? So they're going to be doing whatever they can. If he had 2 days in 2025 to work on the 26 car, every team on the grid would take that, probably including Red Bull. Yeah,
absolutely. So there's going to be a lot of talk about where Newey's going to go. I think the one thing we can be sure of is, as we've referenced, he wanted to get out of Red Bull. That's his priority. It's not getting out of Red Bull to facilitate something else. And I wouldn't blame him if he wants a little bit of a time off, a bit of a gap year or something, and then come back later. Who knows? But it could just be he's waiting to see what's out there. Because now it's not a hypothetical that he's available. He is available. And that can sometimes change what people offer. And who knows, he might come out of the woodwork elsewhere. But he's earned the right to be in demand. And he's earned the right to have some time off and enjoy life even more. So good luck to him. Well, thanks, Glenn and Josh. There's plenty more to watch, read and listen to about the Newey situation on our website and YouTube channel. There's doubtless going to be plenty more to come as the details of his future start to emerge. Remember, if you like what you're listening to, you might be interested in the Race Members Club. For more on that, click on the link in the episode description or click on Go Ad Free on our website. You can also sign up for our special members podcasts via Apple Podcasts. And if you like what you're listening to, give us a positive review on your podcast platform of choice, as that really does help. There's going to be plenty more on Newey, as well as the on-track action this weekend, so stay with us for everything you need to know for the Miami Grand Prix.
The Athletic.